Today we continue our coverage of Tata Steel 2021, an over-the-board classical slow game chess tournament being held in Vikensee in the Netherlands. Yesterday there was a rest day. Actually, a lot of you were messaging me to make a recap, but long game tournaments have rest days when the players just do nothing. They stare at a wall for 12 hours or, I don't know, whatever super Grandmasters do to entertain themselves. Today we've got 3 games that we're looking at. The man on the thumbnail, Niels Grandelius, we will look at third. So I've got 3 games. There's timestamps on the video player. Excuse me if you're not patient. But once again, we will begin with the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, playing against Alexander Donchenko, who is a German player and in last place, actually, at the moment. He was a last-minute replacement for Daniel Dubov. What's interesting is that Magnus began with e4, Donchenko goes c5, the Sicilian defense, and they play the open Sicilian and the Najdorf. One of the most theoretical positions in all of chess, especially in the Sicilian defense. And interesting that Donchenko plays against Magnus the way I wanted all of these other guys to be playing against Magnus Carlsen. If you missed recap of day 4 and 3, all these dudes are just trying to suck the life out of the position when they play Magnus Carlsen because they don't want to, they don't want to fight the guy. We get bishop e3, e5, and Magnus Carlsen castles queenside, which is normal in the Sicilian, but black has a rook on this file, so he's castling into the attack. And oftentimes, black will either castle short or just not castle at all. So it's a seriously tense Sicilian fight, so we get knight to a5. The point is that you got a vision here between the pieces. If white were to take, black would immediately bring the queen, pressuring this, pressuring this. Black is also going to go b5, b4. And the reason why black is able to leave the king in the center of the board is because there's no real way for white to actually break through. You can't take this pawn ever, and you don't have a pawn break. You need this f-pawn to go to f4 to ever accomplish any sort of breaking of the position, but by then you're going to get slaughtered. So in the game, he does not take. Instead, he plays bishop g5, and he welcomes the capture of his knight, because when that happens, he will be able to double these pawns and actually create a repelling force against black's pieces, which is why black does not take on b3, take, Magnus puts his knight on d5, bishop g5 check, king b1, and Donchenko plays h5 to prevent Magnus from expanding on this side of the board. He actually pushes the pawn all the way to h4, and now and only now does Magnus take because he has this move, queen to b3. Now the knight is stabilized, and the pawn on b7 is a target. Magnus Carlsen is doing to the Najdorf what is supposed to happen to the Najdorf by a very strong player with white. Nerfing the pieces that can possibly attack your king, getting out of the way of any long-range attackers, and this d5 square. You'll notice black has pawns on e5 and d6. So that means that the light square in the middle is very well controlled. This knight is standing on kind of an outpost square, is what that's called. So if black were to ever take, white would take back with the rook, pressuring the queen, the pawn, the pawn, the pawn, and double up. Actually, you would not take with the pawn, because that would block your own piece's activity. So queen c5, and while Donchenko goes for a queen trade, and we get this position. So now it's 2 rooks, and knight versus bishop, and both sides have 7 pawns. How do you play an endgame like this? Well, you need to optimize your setup, which is why we see Magnus Carlsen putting his structure like this, out of the way of the enemy dark squared bishop. Yes, the bishop can move in and out of your position, but the bishop cannot target anything. Identifying the weaknesses. Okay, these are the weaknesses potentially. Watch as Magnus Carlsen plays against, the d6 pawn. He's got the double stack, he's got the knight, he's expanding on this side of the board. But Donchenko doesn't have any, actually weak things. He's defending everything. And look at Magnus trying to expand. And this is finally when the game gets the most exciting. d5, a pawn break. You say, Levy, why not chop, 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 chop? And I would say, well, you're not wrong. I mean, chop, 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 chop is all good. But at the end, there's rook to g6. And remember that weakness we talked about earlier? Yeah, it can't be defended now. If you go back with the rook, the bishop is there. So you would lose this. And then both of these become very weak. So chop, 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 but then you get chopped too, and you know what they say. Person who gets chopped last. I don't know what they say. b5, rook d6, take, king a4, rook b8. And again, Magnus is just trying to break on that side. Magnus has what we call a queenside majority, potentially. He's got a potential 2-on-1, is what that's called. So you trade everybody off, you're going to have one pass pawn. The problem is that Alexander Donchenko is no slouch, and he's just not letting Magnus do anything. In fact, he finds this really nice idea, rook to c4, and you can't take it, because if you do, protect it like this. And fork, and you actually lose a rook. So At this point, the players cross the 40th move barrier, which means that they have been added 50 minutes to their clock each. They each have 50 minutes. Well, Danchenko moves his rook out of the way. And even though Magnus Carlsen has a one-pawn advantage for the moment, the next kind of element of endgames, the knight, is really passive. And material matters in the endgame, but more than anything else, it's how active your pieces are. Alexander Danchenko's pieces are looking mighty nice. And what happens is he hunts down the A-pawn, everything flies off the board, all the pieces get traded. Magnus Carlsen still trying to make a little bit of progress with this passed D-pawn, trying to get knight c5 and push and everything, but rook c1, and Danchenko is just hanging in there with him. Doesn't matter how far you go. If d7 check, just king to d8. No, if you go to, actually, this is very funny. If you go there, you lose, because king to e4, I threaten promotion, and then I win the game. Because you can't take, and then I'm just going to make a queen. So actually, you have to be a little bit accurate, but, you know, he's a 26xx GM, and Magnus sacrifices the knight, goes for a mate, and then black has to sacrifice a rook, and yet it's still a draw. Because every single pawn that black ends up having is just defending the bishop. So the pawn goes all the way down. Yeah, see, it's possible actually to lose this with white, by the way. Not if you're Magnus Carlsen, but if you're, you know, Schmibbity Flibbity 47, or somebody go make that a username on chess.com. But in this case, you know, we get this. So that was the game of Magnus Carlsen for the day. Credit to Danchenko for fighting. Very interesting game, exciting game. Some instructive moments about the endgame there. And the second game I have for you for the day is David Anton Guijarro, who's the Spanish Grandmaster, versus TARI, who is just frequently involved in interesting and exciting games. Although we have a Berlin defense, which is well known as a meme in chess to be the most boring opening of all time. And every move that you see played in front of you, including this weird queen trade, is all theory. All of this is theory. And then really the game is like, the question is like, what happens now? Okay, so it's move 16, 17. They've traded a queen, they've traded a bishop, they've traded both knights, and they've traded one pawn. They just really like to trade. They learned, you know, well in preschool that sharing is caring. So now they trade one more pawn, by the way. So what is going on here? The game is going to be won and lost depending on the pawns and depending on the activity of your pieces. And in this case, black finds a way to activate his king, so everything is protected. But these pawns could be a little bit of a target. And so you watch as Guijarro sacrifices the pawn on c2 for free and activates his rook. He then brings the rook back because he's going this way or this way to hunt the pawns. Right, so black is just not able to get their pieces into the game because of the constant threat creation. Bishop f6, rook f7, rook g5, king h6, bishop e5. So we have one more trade and now f4. Right? So what is going on? Again, it's an endgame of rook and bishop versus rook and bishop. So what matters in the endgame? Pawns, right? We just saw from last game the pawn weaknesses. In this case, it's going to be a super unique endgame because one guy has a 3-on-1. When you have a 3-on-1, you gotta push the damn 3-on-1. You know what happens when a pawn gets to the end of the board? It becomes a queen, or a rook, or a knight, or a bishop. You can't get two kings, though. Chess is not that progressive yet. So h4, rook g4, king h5, and bishop g7. You say, why would he go bishop g7? That move doesn't look like it makes any sense. He goes bishop g7. I actually don't know why he played bishop g7. He goes bishop g7 because, I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. Rook g5 is mate. That's why the move bishop g7 is played, defended by the pawn. So now bishop g7 threatens rook to g5. Black has to play rook to f5, right? Rook to f5. All right, so bishop back to c3. Bishop takes a2. Bishop e1, a5, rook h4, king g6. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have a 3-on-0. So you've got to push the pawns. You've got to push your pawn. No, that's a bishop move, David Anton. David Anton, that is a rook move. You are not pushing your... You are not pushing your pawns. Why are you not pushing your pawns? Push your pawns. G4. C5. Okay, it's time to play G... Okay, I am going to call this man and tell him to push his pawns. The reality of the situation is, ladies and gentlemen, this is the 38th, 39th, 37th move of the game. They are right before they're getting their bonus time. They don't have a lot of time on the clock. They are in what's called a time trouble. When I keep saying that rather than stopping the other pawns, you know, David Anton should have played the move g4, this would have led to a crazy endgame. So black's best move is to sacrifice, because if you don't, I just keep pushing and I'm faster. So you sacrifice. and then b4. Okay, and then black plays rook h8. And it's a crazy endgame, absolutely insane endgame that could lead to this position, and the truth is that actually black is okay here. Like, black is just in time to break through and do this and this, but, you know, he didn't push his pawns. You gotta push your pawns. And what ends up happening is, well, he never pushes his pawns. Black is able to just break through on the other side of the board, but it's not the end of the story. So the rook has to sacrifice itself, right? Okay, but this is an easy draw because I've got a 3-0, and I've got a passed a pawn. I'm just gonna bring my king. I'm gonna win your pawn. That's it. You can't beat me with king and bishop. It's gonna be an easy draw. King f2, bishop c2, g4, c5, king e3, king f6, king d2, bishop a4, h4, bishop d7, f5, bishop a4, king e3, c4, king f4, c3. Levy, slow down. Doesn't matter. Game is a draw. Or is it? g5 check, king f7. Okay, so I gotta stop this pawn. Let me bring my king back. How does black stop white from bringing the king back? Bishop to b5. You can't bring the king. You can't move the king, actually, because if you move it this way, the pawn promotes, and if you move it this way, the pawn promotes, and if you move it to that square, you lose your king, or that square, you lose your king. So, if Ari and Tari played the move bishop to b5, white would have deflected the bishop. Bishop would have gone back to a6. White would have pushed the pawn. Black would have moved the king. And white runs out of moves! White runs out of moves! White doesn't have any moves. White's just gotta keep pushing these pawns. You play bishop to b5, white plays h6 check, for example. King to h7. White is out of moves. g6 take. f6. I mean, I don't know. King g6. White is out of moves. White loses. White just loses the game. White's pawns walk until they can't walk any further. Bam, bam. Bam, bam. Bam, bam. That's it. Game is over. Pawns have to be crazy. What an insane turn of events. And instead of that, we got c2, snatching a draw from the jaws of victory is Ari and Tari. Because after c2, the king just stops the pawn. And now, you know, now that's it. No one can make progress. The white king cannot go push these pawns, help push the pawns because the pawn promotes. And this pawn, draw. Crazy. Absolutely insane. Wow. But that brings me to the final game of the day. And if you skipped ahead to this part, what are you doing? Go back and watch the other stuff. Anyway, Niels Grandelius, Swedish #1, playing French #1, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And Niels Grandelius is having a great event, tied for first place, trying to get into the 2700 club. You know what happens when you become a 2700 FIDE Grandmaster? Me neither. I'm not a 2700 FIDE Grandmaster, but I hear you get flown out on a private jet, you get toured around a private island. It's really nice. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c d4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. The Najdorf Sicilian, ladies and gentlemen, you saw this in the first game. Unless you skipped ahead to this, you missed the first game, then what? Go back. Bishop g5, e6, f4, queen b6. Main line. Tens of thousands of games of this have been played. Tens of thousands, if not millions, drops of blood have been spilled in this position. And this is known as the poisoned pawn Najdorf. It's when black takes on b2 and laughs in the face of danger. Rook b1, queen a3. The point is that you're not really supposed to take this pawn because white gets development. White is winning time by attacking your queen. Plays f5, bishop e7. Take, and develops another piece. And black is just like I mean, by the way, rook takes b7 is not taken even though it looks like it's a free pawn because this is theory. This has been worked out to be the best move for both sides by computers. So don't ask any questions because the AI knows best. Knight d7, bishop e6, knight c5, bishop comes back. So this is a breaking point because here white can actually play any three of these moves according to theory. Niels plays bishop b3, black plays rook to c8, white castles, black takes, rook takes, queen c5 check, bishop e3, and queen to c4, attacking this pawn. Again, white can take, but that would lose a knight, so Niels didn't do that. Niels plays rook f4. Defending this. Now in this position, this is black's 19th move, and MVL, who is the world's leading practitioner in this opening, needed to remember that the move here is the move knight to h5, according to like 2 games played in the database, so maybe the modern day computer actually knows best. But MVL spent a little bit of time here and retreated with his queen, volunteering this pawn for capture and then castling the king. Niels plays h3. So what is the count? It is now the 21st move of the game. Niels Grandelius has an extra pawn. He also has yellow stripes on his flag, so that's nice. Rook b8, rook a7, rook a8. MVL really wants a rook trade, so all right, we acquiesce. Vocab word. Knight to d5. Because if you take on e4 here and attack my queen, I go check, which is worth more than a queen. Then you take, and now your queen relinquished control of this square. Queen to d5 attacks all deux, trois, 3. And the Frenchman would resign if this occurred. So we got rook to b8 instead, and now c4. Niels is getting another pawn involved. Niels is, he's European. He's trying to give everybody a shot, right? So everybody's moved except the a-pawn and the g-pawn. So we get bishop to d8, queen f2, knight d7, bishop to d4. You'll notice that everything he's doing is coordinating his pieces beautifully. Rook and queen staring straight down, not mate, but bishop now activates toward this way. Knight is active. Bishop to g5, rook to f5, bishop to h6. And here Niels plays king to h2. Why did he play king to h2? I don't know. This time, I actually don't know. I'm not gonna lie. It's not my job to know. It's just my job to tell you what happened. So, I can explain to you why I think he played king to h2. Oftentimes, when you're in attacking situations, you want to improve your position fully before you go for a devastating final push of attack. And Niels did not want his rook, the enemy rook, to go down to the back rank and check him and attack him. And he felt like that would probably be unpleasant. So, that's why he played king h2, and then queen to g3. After g6, queen h4, you realize that he's just allowing his rook to be taken. For free. The free rook. But, then you take back. Where's this queen going? If the queen has to stay guarding the bishop, it can't. It's never going to be able to do that. If it takes, knight to e7. And I fork the familia. El rey, dama, and torre en c8. Jaque. And the game is over. So, bishop f8. Beautiful move. Queen h4. And now, even more beautiful move. Rook f6. Because, even though it can be taken, it would result in a devastating attack on your king. If you go here or here, it's mate. So you have to go here. After which I go here, you have to block, and I slide my knight back. Now my bishop and queen hit this. Your only move to guard that is rook to g8 and knight h6. And the game is over. Because I hit this and this. You can't take because you're pinned. And Niels would have spotted all of this. So, MVL goes back to e8. But the problem is Niels really wants to lose this rook. Rook takes f8. He hits the piñata. Queen f8, knight e7, king f7, knight takes c8. And MVL resigns because after queen takes c8, queen takes h7, it's a check. The king has to go somewhere, and he is going to be 3 pawns down. And MVL's a damn good player, but he's not going to win this game 3 pawns down. So Niels Grandelius wins again. That is the 3rd person that Niels has defeated in this event, ladies and gentlemen. Niels just cannot be stopped. And so at the end of day 5, he is the sole leader with 3.5 points out of 5. 3 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. Niels has 4 decisive games in 5 rounds. So I respect him. He is showing up every day to fight. In 2nd place, we have a tie between Hare Krishna, Carlsen, Caruana, and Anish Giri. Games will continue, recaps will continue. As always, leave a comment below if you've made it this far in the video. Tell me who your mid-tournament favorite is now to finish in maybe top 3. And I look forward to the future rounds.